Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Muhammad. I'm the Executive Director here at the Jerusalem Fund and Palestine Center. And as always, it's a pleasure to welcome you all here online. Before we get started, I wanted to just say a few words. Obviously, as you all know, Palestine is under attack right now. And our hearts, of course, go out to all Palestinians suffering, whether it's in Gaza or Jerusalem, the West Bank, in 48 Palestine, or in the refugee camps and on the borders in Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria. In response to these terrible Israeli attacks, we've started an emergency campaign for Gaza and Jerusalem to fundraise for humanitarian relief efforts. If you are able to, please donate whatever you can, because Palestinians are definitely going to need our help right now. As always, 100% of all donations will be used only for relief, none for operating or admin expenses. You can donate online at www.thejerusalemfund.org/Gaza Jerusalem, one word. Or you can visit our website at thejerusalemfund.org, where you'll find the donation page and buttons to take you to the donation page. You can also donate through Facebook on our Facebook page. Please also let your family and friends know, because every dollar helps. And if you're unable to donate, you can also help us by following us on Twitter. Our account is @Palestine Center. On Facebook, which is facebook.com/Jerusalem Fund, and on Instagram, where our account is also Jerusalem Fund. And please let your family and friends know about our social media accounts as well. And that's where we share all of our updates, news from Palestine, and upcoming events. So any help that you can provide is much appreciated. Thank you very much. Today, we're happy to host Dr. Shafeeq Ghabra for a talk titled The Palestine Nakba, From Ethnic Cleansing in 1948 to Apartheid in 2021, where he will discuss the history of the Nakba and what it means to Palestinians. He will also answer some major questions on the establishment of Israel, the forced ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian population, stories about the land, and refugees. He will conclude with an analysis of the present situation in Palestine as a case of ongoing and deepening ethnic cleansing and apartheid. We are also very happy to host Said Arikat here, who will be moderating this event. So a little bit about Dr. Shafeeq Ghabra. He has been a professor of political science at Kuwait University since 1987, and he was a founding president of the American University of Kuwait from 2003 to 2006. He also directed the Kuwait Information Office in Washington, D.C. from 1998 to 2002, as well as the Center of Strategic Studies at Kuwait University from 2002 to 2003. Dr. Ghabra earned his BA from Georgetown University in 1975, his MA from Purdue University in 1983, and his PhD in political science from the University of Texas at Austin in 1987. He is the author of 8 books and numerous studies, including Palestinians in Kuwait, The Family and the Politics of Survival, and The Nakba and the Emergence of the Palestinian Diaspora in Kuwait. Dr. Ghabra has also been a regular columnist and guest of various international and Arab media outlets since 1988. Said Arikat is a member of the Palestine Center Committee here, and he is the Washington Bureau Chief for the Palestinian newspaper Al-Quds, a daily for which he is a writer, columnist, and analyst. He previously served as spokesman and director of public information for the United Nations Assistance Mission for Iraq. And he currently teaches as an adjunct professor at American University in Washington, D.C. At the end of the discussion, we will have a Q&A session. So for everybody watching, you can ask your questions on the YouTube chat feature, which is on the side, or you can tweet your questions to @Palestine Center. For any of you watching on Facebook, you can also post your messages and questions there. So I will now pass it on to Said, and thank you both for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Muhammad. And I'm truly honored, Dr. Shafeeq, to be with you, to have this conversation with you. Dr. Shafeeq is, of course, a tremendous intellectual asset for the Palestinians as they go through their struggle for liberation, especially at these trying times. Certainly, if anyone knows the history of the Palestinians and the Nakba in particular, it is Dr. Shafeeq Ghabra. So without further ado, Dr. Shafeeq, a few days ago, less than 4 days ago, or 4 days ago exactly, Palestinians commemorated this very traumatic event. You know, the 73rd anniversary of this dramatic event. More than 700,000 people, maybe close to 800,000 people, were, you know, basically driven from their homes by force. Hundreds of villages and towns and so on were destroyed. Many of these Palestinian refugees ended up in Gaza, and in fact, now, you know, they bear the brunt of this horrific Israeli aggression. So that is ongoing now. And so, how do you see the significance of this 73rd anniversary of the Nakba through this, you know, moment in time, as we see Palestinians suffer, get destroyed, get killed, women, children, and so on, but also stand heroically in the face of this horrible aggression?
So as we agreed to make it a dialogue, a question and answer and a dialogue. So in really dealing with this question, how do I see the Nakba today? It's a continuity of the Nakba that happened then. Nothing has stopped. And the Nakba goes through the decades. It's the same story. A group of people, and then when Israel was established, the Israeli state, the Zionist state, had a mission, and the mission is to clear the land from the original inhabitants, and that's the ethnic cleansing part. And the other mission is to claim the land, to steal, to take, to put its hands on. And as this happens, Palestinians will definitely resist it. And the story of the Palestinians since the Nakba, but also during the Nakba, and since the British Mandate in 1920, and during the British Mandate in 1920, all the way till 1948, and even the story of the Palestinians during the last 20 or 30 years of the Ottoman Empire is a story of resisting that particular myth, that there is a land that is empty for a group of people who don't have a state. And the reality, Palestine was full of Palestinians. They had hundreds of towns and villages, had many cities, had an urban elite, had a prosperous agriculture, had a prosperous life, and were central. I mean, even during Ottoman times, Jerusalem and its vicinity, Mutasarrifiyat al-Quds, Jerusalem was central in the Ottoman Empire. And so all of that tells us that we are experiencing a process of a continuity of the Nakba. And because of that, the Nakba today lives exactly as it happened in 1948 and before, meaning that nothing has been resolved. Neither the Palestinians were allowed to return, neither their properties were given back to them, nor their the Israelis followed them into the West Bank, into East Jerusalem, followed them into Gaza, followed the refugees everywhere with brutal power. And so the Nakba was not resolved ever, and no solution was found, and therefore it is a present and a future reality, given that the Palestinians experience it and cannot accept what is thrown on them.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, as you said, it's what the whole thing was begun with the notion that Palestine was a land without people, and the Jews were a people without land, which is, of course, you know, a big myth. But that's, I guess, the best way to erase a people is say they do not exist. And that was the premise. The premise of that notion was that the Palestinians don't exist. And of course, as you mentioned, historically they have existed. They go back, hundreds, thousands of years, probably. Very, in many ways, they sort of, they are the history of the geography itself. The history of the country itself can be traced, probably thousands of years back. I'm no historian. I don't know that. But when we look at what is happening today, for these people, for the Palestinians who are in Jabalia, for Shujaiya and many of these refugee camps that are probably one of the most densely populated areas on earth. Somebody was saying that Gaza was second to Calcutta in terms of population density. So how do they deal with this very traumatic event that, we have, it doesn't stop, it is episodic, but it does not stop. How do they deal with it? How do the Palestinians deal with it actually to go on to the next day and to the next part of the next station along the way to liberation?
See, my understanding of this is that the Nakba itself was so unjust, so difficult, so painful at every level. Even if I tell you stories of my family from both my father and my mother, it's amazing the injustice, the difficulty, the complexity of, it's not like only losing your land, your house, but losing your entire place. Not only losing a property, you could lose it in a market, but it's losing the entire collective being of who you are, your entire community, like city like Haifa. Only 3,000 Arabs stayed, and they kicked them all out of their houses and put them in a certain poor area, settled them there, and then suddenly, they came and took over the houses, the property, the places, the shops, the markets, the businesses. They just simply took over. No remorse, nothing. So it was so unjust that you leave penniless, you leave totally destroyed. And then they start to erase your memory, to erase your history, to erase and look into excavation to prove that you didn't even exist. Though it is true, you belong to a civilization that has roots that goes back to the Canaanites and goes back to the old Palestinians who existed. It's a whole story of how Palestinians were formed as a nation, as a people, within the Arab context, definitely, and within the Islamic context. So the difficulty, the complexity, the level of the injustice created out of the Palestinians a tough people. A people who are tough, who could take some of the worst experiences and try to turn them into something positive, try to resist. This is how they were totally broken in 1948, and yet they were able to flourish through education, through know-how, through their abilities, and they became very tough. And therefore, it is not surprising to me to have seen this in Lebanon during the times when Israel was erasing refugee camps. Place like Rashidiyya was erased in South Lebanon, next to Tyre, was erased several times, and the Palestinians rebuilt it. A place like Sabra and Shatila, despite the massacre, people have that will, because it's the level of the injustice made them strong. And yet they are human, they suffer, they cry, they feel the pain, they know exactly where they are, but they realize that their back is to the wall. Their back is to the sea. Where do you go from there? Where do you go? You go where? To places that may end up even massacring you as well. Places where you become a refugee, into a refugee. Where do you go? This is the stand. And therefore, when you look at the symbol of even Palestinian resistance in the 1970s into 82, why did the Palestinians in the Beaufort Castle, that is Salah ad-Din Castle in South Lebanon, 40 of them stand, fight, and die, knowing that the Israeli army is 100 times stronger and will be able to kill all of them, yet they fight and they create casualties on the other, they keep the flame. And therefore, that's not gonna go. They are able to resist. And then you compare with other peoples, the Vietnamese in the worst times. Vietnam was destroyed many times, and yet, the Yemenis, under the situation that we are seeing today.
Right.
Of people, yeah, they, you know, so it's not unusual for when there is big injustice, there is a true resistance, and people will face up to it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, you mentioned something very profound about, you know, people who are being made refugees for the third and fourth and fifth time. I heard that, you know, some people from Jabalia, or I mean, thousands, tens of thousands, that have been driven in the last few days into just another location and so on. So it is ongoing, and as you mentioned, I mean, if we go back to the history of the last 50 years and so on, Israel has pursued the Palestinians, killing their intellectuals, assassinating their leaders, going after them in places as far as Tunis, you know, and other places, of course, Lebanon, time and time again. But you know, through it all, the Palestinians have proven to be industrious and able to emerge. But there has been, you know, one must admit that if you review the history of the last, let's say 60 years, or let's say since, you know, 65, the emergence of the modern Palestinian revolution, there has been a great deal of, I would say, vacuum in terms of a leadership that is able to deliver the Palestinians. So, I mean, despite it all, they go on. So why do you think that a people that are able to resist and able to do all this and able to produce, you know, a great deal of talent, are not able to, let's say, produce a kind of leadership that really should be up to bar to the, you know, the size, the sheer, you know, size of this complex issue?
The way I look at it is that we are a product of our generation.
Yeah.
We are a product of our experiences.
Right.
And so was the leadership of Haj Amin al-Husseini,
right.
and the group surrounding him in Palestine, that the leaders who were affluent, actually, who represented a certain class structure in Palestine and were able to do good things, but at the same time, they had shortcomings, definitely. Particularly when you are dealing with a far more advanced enemy who has come from all over the world with a certain intention, with the support of international capital, with the support of the Rothschilds of the world, with the support of, it wasn't an easy job to face all of that. Yet people, yes, gave sacrifice and resisted heavily. Look at 36, 39, the Qassam Revolution. That was an amazing one. It was one of the biggest in the Arab world against any colonial power. 5,000 Palestinians died, 15,000 injured, 100 and more executed by the British. That was phenomenal. So yes, they produce leaders, and they produce some good ones as well. Not always the ones that you see not able. I mean, they're political, they're military leaders as well. They're activists, they're all kinds of leaders that are produced. So I look at 65 as a new era as well, where there is a new generation that was schooled in a certain way, went to certain educated mostly in Egyptian universities, lived for a while. Many of them lived in Kuwait and formed their ideas while in Kuwait, but some in other Gulf countries. And so you had a leadership, but I always felt that the circumstances surrounding the entire struggle is so complex, because you're operating within 22 or so Arab countries. You're operating in an international environment that is not hospitable. You're dealing with an enemy that is the most deceptive, the most complicated, the most the enemy that is willing to go all the way to protect an ideology that is very colonial, settler, very archaic in the 20th and 21st century. So I'm not blaming here, but what I'm trying to say is that we are a product of our times, and I think that the Palestinians will keep producing. Now, looking at the ground myself, the ground, the reality, like if you really examine the number of Palestinian leaders that were executed by the Israelis and totally assassinated by the Israelis, some of them were phenomenal. Actually, I can name many who maybe you know some, but the majority of Palestinians don't know them.
Right.
And who were selfless, but these were the cadre in the middle. These were the operatives. These were, you can do that with the Hamas group, but you can do that with the Fatah group. You can do that with the Popular Front. You can do it across the aisle. Those could have been leaders of the future. Many of them, most of them, were assassinated.
Right.
It's a massacre of, you have a Zionist entity that plans how to assassinate, and look what they did with many of the Hamas leadership. Look what
Right.
they did with many of the Fatah leadership, the middle, those who could be the future. But at the end, I see that the Palestinians will produce. Today, I look at Sheikh Jarrah, and I see the Kurd family. Yes.
We are related to them, as a matter of
Yes,
fact.
and
Okay.
they are future leaders.
Yeah.
So you see, the challenge for Zionism was the following. I mean, settler colonialism has always been able to eradicate completely the native population.
Right.
The Zionists, I mean, Herzl didn't care whether to go to Palestine or Uganda or Argentina.
Right.
It is, you see, Zionism, there is a big chunk of it is a Russian phenomenon.
Right.
Poor Russian, poor Polish areas
Right.
that had that, and they were religious as well.
Right.
And it's that. So they came as settler colonialism finally to Palestine to discover that they cannot get rid of the natives. That today the native population is equal to their population. There is no way to get rid of it. So this is this frustrates the Zionist movement and keeps producing for us more extremists who want to go further into massacring, into killing, into murdering, into destroying Al-Aqsa because it's a symbol. They want to destroy every city you have. They want to make sure you don't have a center, you don't have a place that ignites your identity and your pride. And they want to make you totally, they want to decide who lives and who dies and who exists among you. It is a very unique type of settler colonialism that failed to get rid of the Palestinian people. And the Palestinian people over time are learning. I mean, today Hamas is learning much new lessons compared to what it had in 2014. Talking even from a military point of view, as simple as it is, they will get there. So I think we will be producing and have produced in the past. And all this Palestinian nationalism and movement was on the shoulders of many Palestinian leaders, some of them known, some of them not known, some of them died in silence and nobody knew besides the people who knew them. And that will continue.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Israel is a ruthless enemy of the Palestinians. And in fact, it sees a mortal threat in any Palestinian. I mean, you know, when you have hordes of people marching the streets of Jerusalem and calling this to the Arabs, and they do this also in Arab villages within 1948 Israel, it shows you that you're right. I mean, we are looking at a society that is by any standard and by the acknowledgement even of very pro-Israel friends and so on, they state that Israel has become more and more right-wing. It is becoming more and more fascistic. They espouse these, really supremacist ideas and so on. And because they only probably see their survival only through that kind of supremacy and through the eradication of all Palestinians. But also, one must also admit that, as it was in 1987, during this great intifada that went on for, 3 or 4 years until it was sort of put out, the flame was put out by some sort of a political process, the Oslo process. And as we have seen in Sheikh Jarrah and in Jerusalem, I mean, it seemed leaderless. It seemed that, it was basically like a field kind of leadership that, congregate and went on to protect Al-Aqsa, as their slogan. And in fact, until the fighting erupted, with Hamas launching a rocket, and then the Israelis just bombing the hell out of Gaza. Until then, all the factions, including Hamas, were really left behind. So it is, the Palestinians are always a step ahead of their leadership. It doesn't matter what this leadership is made of. To what you attribute this phenomenon? How could it go on? I mean, does it have the seeds of its own sort of, flickering away, or does it have the seeds of going further?
You see, the activism I am seeing today in Al-Aqsa, in Sheikh Jarrah, and in other places in Palestine. Luckily, Al-Aqsa and Sheikh Jarrah and Jerusalem doesn't have a political burden on it, neither from Fatah or Hamas or anyone. Maybe some of their cadre participates, but there is no political burden on them. They face the occupation directly. What I see is a movement that has a grassroots depth to it. And these movements in the 21st century, they seem to have a spirit. They seem to have a soul. They seem to have a dynamism among the young, mostly dominated by young. I mean, whether you go to Occupy Wall Street or you go to the murder of George Floyd and the movement that erupted after that, you get a sense of where we're going in history, in a historical sense, related to globalization, related to the way the world has operated,
right. Connectedness,
access, social media, etc. It has created an ability to create a different kind of what we define as leaders or leadership, and movements that can sustain themselves through all this kind of action, and where there is no single leader with an iron hand that takes all the people with him in the direction. You may not see that, but you will see more these young operatives and the soul, the overall feeling for a movement that can be creative, particularly when we're talking about civil rights movements, civil non-violent rocks and expressions of anger, and putting people together, demonstrating, creating awareness. I mean, Sheikh Jarrah created awareness. It brought the Nakba to every house in the world.
Right.
Very simple. I mean, brought the Nakba. I mean, the Israelis who did Sheikh Jarrah should be ashamed of themselves, because what they did, they reminded the world of what has happened in 1948 and what has happened in the 1950s. All this dispossession has entered every household in the world. So I see us going in that direction. Now, doesn't mean you cannot organize more at a higher level, coordinate, etc. But that will happen. However, I see that this is the new bed. This is the new reality. This is the new movement, and it's not going to be unique to the Palestinians. It is worldwide.
Let me ask you about the Arab dimension. Because we've seen this eruption in Jerusalem, of course, and Sheikh Jarrah with good reason. We have had episodes in the past, sometime violent confrontation with the Israeli soldiers and armed settlers and so on, and sometimes it's just, some sort of a protest. We've seen this, go day after day. They go to Al-Aqsa, they try to exercise for, freedom of worship and all these things. And we see it resonate, of course, in Palestine, 1948, among Palestinians in the 1948 area, in the Arab towns and villages and so on. And we see it in Gaza. But we don't really see the level, let's say, of empathy or the level of solidarity, maybe with a few exceptions, that we have seen, let's say, in the past. There was a great deal of, empathy with the Palestinians when they were fighting the Israelis from Lebanon and so on, or even during the first Intifada, something that we have seen lacking. Why is that?
Well, keep in mind that the Arab world had major revolutions in 2010 to 11, and that was the Arab Spring. Right. But then there was a blunt counter-revolution that tried to and sought to destroy the activists and the results of these revolutions. But the story of the Arab world's change and transformation has just begun in 2010, 2011. It will continue to go deep into the grassroots of populations in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, even the United Arab Emirates, by the way, the Emiratis themselves, the people, and definitely Kuwait, among others. You'll be surprised that people are very sympathetic, are very connected, because that connection has to do with whom they are, the identity, Islam, being Arab, justice and injustice. The Arab populations actually are thirsty for justice, each in their own country and state. And when they see injustice elsewhere, they definitely can feel the pain. So yes, the Arab world feels your pain. Look, when you open the space, like in a place like Kuwait, you feel how the population moves and goes into sit-ins and demonstrations, etc. You open it up in Morocco. Look at the Moroccans. You see it. It represents. But in a place where nothing is open, even an article is not allowed. Even the simplest expression can throw you totally out of your job, out of livelihood, and etc. Under a certain type of dictatorship that we have spread, then you're not going to see. You would think that the representatives are the spokespersons of the state. The reality is that the population and many of those who are in jail are totally pro-Palestinian, and they experience injustice and they support the Palestinians because they are living a situation of full injustice. So don't count the Arab world out. The Arab world, yes, will give its voice. And then take another account into the analysis, is that we've had an Arab nationalist movement during the Nasser era and beyond. And that Arab nationalist movement created an entire environment. But then it was hit, it was destroyed, it was challenged, and 67 played a role, the Arab-Israeli war. But then you get the Islamic movement.
Right.
And then as the situation gets more complicated in the Arab world, you have now a new generation. So I am witnessing a new generation. I see them in Kuwait. I see them when I travel. I see them when I talk with young Arabs everywhere. There is a sense of Arabism coming all over again. It's different than the old Arab nationalism. It also has roots in the sense of civilization and Islamic identity, but it's an Arab identity. And there is with it progressive ideas for change. There is a sense that the Arabs today are totally divided and destroyed. There is a critique of the Sykes-Picot, what it imposed on the Arabs. So how to display is not yet clear, but there is today a revolutionary Arab. He is pro-Palestinian, he is pro-change, he's very progressive. He wants to have a country that is independent from the West, independent in its own right. And he or she, I mean, there is, many of those are the operatives of the Arab Spring of 2011, 2012, who became exiled in so many countries of the world, who are speaking to each other and trying to write, to develop their ideas into the next era. So the Arab world is going through a very deep process. And we've witnessed some of the expressions, Algeria, Sudan for a while. We've seen it in Iraq. You'll see it. I think it will come back. And I think when you look at the Palestinians' ability to resist and stand and protect their dignity and identity, no matter what the circumstances, this is a model for the Arab world, and it has an impact. Actually, when I did my research in Egypt on the 2011 revolution in Egypt, and I met many of the young activists who were very central to the revolution, many of them were telling me Gaza was an inspiration to us. And many of them told me, we went to Gaza and got that inspiration. They will go through the tunnels and come back. So it's an open book. It's open. History has not ended. And there is a lot that will be happening. And Zionism will be facing more challenges in that region. It has chosen enmity with the Arab populations. It has chosen enmity with the peoples of the Arab world. It has chosen friendship with some of the regimes that may not be popular.
No. Well, I want to press this point further. Of course, I mean, Zionism is a colonial movement, so it can only exist on, the sort of wreckage of the people that it is colonizing. I want to go back. You said something that struck me about the rise of Islamism in a way. To fill the vacuum of, let's say, Pan-Arabism that we have seen in the 50s was dealt a major blow in 1967. But why with the events that we saw, the Arab Spring, let's say between, I guess, January 2011 and so on, we saw a great deal of, or what appeared to be a rejection of Pan-Arabism. And people looked on their own. They looked to their own countries and so on, to their own states, so to speak. So if it's not, Islamism, which is really very loose and goes across borders and so on, then it is internal. Why is that? There has not been a re-emergence of Pan-Arabism that used to, ignite the passions of Arabs everywhere, let's say with the voice of Nasser or others.
You see, we need to look at 2/11 in its own context.
Right.
So no need to read more into it. It is the first attempt by the Arab populations, because it wasn't only the Arab Spring revolutions, there were also many movements across the region affected by the wave, the big tsunami of the Arab revolution. But we need to look at it that this is the first time the Arab population said, I want something. I demand something. I want to have those I govern accountable to me. I exist, I say, I speak, I represent. It's the first time in 30, 40 years of repression. I mean, it doesn't mean there weren't some movements here and there, but it was the regimes killed politics in the Arab world and destroyed it. And with the exception of a few places that still had some elections, Kuwait, one example, but generally the main centers of the populations, there was no air in the no oxygen to practice politics. So that's the beginning. And because of that, the experience is definitely shaky. And that's where the counter-revolution comes. Wait for the counter to the counter. And I think we are evolving. We are evolving into, politics had been revived in the Arab world. Revived not because the regimes want it, because people talk about it and they understand that they have to be involved in their issues, in their rights, in their dignity, in their economy. And so all these issues will come again. But at the same time, there is a deeper problem. I mean, look at Egypt today. I mean, with what Ethiopia is doing with the water. I mean, you're strangling.
The Nahda Dam.
Yes, the Nahda Dam. You're putting an entire civilization under so much stress and a disaster. And Egypt will not be able to tolerate this for long. If the regime doesn't do much, I think there will be something happening in that part of the world. On the other hand, look at Syria, look at Iraq, look at other places. There is a fragmentation of the Arab world. It's like the Arab world has gone to the bottom of the bottom. But it's in that context that young people start to think, if we rise again, could we only rise as Syria and Iraq and Egypt, etc., or we need to think of bigger units? Arab populations are the only ones that live in smaller units in that part of the world. Therefore, their area, their neighborhood, the Arab world, has become a playground for bigger states, superpowers, from the US all the way to Russia, and definitely Turkey has a project, definitely Iran has a project. And so the Arab world is so fragmented that people will think how they can deal with that fragmentation in one way or another. I have no answer to that, but that's where I think and I feel and I hear discussions about Arab. I mean, I get Kuwaitis who are Arab nationalists today. I didn't have them in my class 15 years ago or 20 years ago or 10 years ago. Now I have them in my class. I have You go to many places and you talk with the young. There is a sense of that the Arab is persecuted. Not only the Palestinian. Palestinian is the persecuted of the persecuted at the highest level, but the Arab is also persecuted at every level. And so this is the destiny of this part of the world, will not be shaped by what we see today. It will change. And there will be many questions raised as it changes.
Yeah, I also want to talk about this point. The Arabs are fragmented. There's never been really a cohesive movement, except episodically, as we saw in the 50s, and be it ever so loosely, not a fundamental kind of movement that can produce a thing. Is it because the legacy of colonialism, in your view? Is it because Sykes-Picot, or is it because the Arabs, as many neoliberal Arabs and intellectuals and so on claim, that the Arabs have major internal shortcomings and inability to parallel what is happening in the world, as Europe did, as let's say even China and other places?
It's really hard to tell the many reasons that make the Arab dilemma of today, but we have to remember that repression is one factor. Dictatorship is a factor in the way the Arab world looks the way it is, and that there is much more awareness today of the need to deal with that side. It's also a question, it's an existential question for the region. Can you go on by being in the same context of what Sykes-Picot has produced? See, World War I was the beginning of the disaster.
Right.
Balfour Declaration, Sykes-Picot. Those who wrote Sykes-Picot are the ones who wrote. Sykes wrote Balfour Declaration.
Right.
And so he finished Sykes-Picot and went to write the Balfour Declaration with Wiseman and others, such as Herbert Samuel from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Britain, etc. So today, people are dealing with these big questions. What happens? You produce a country and then it's fragmented in 5 minutes, and then it's destroyed, and then it's divided, and then it's so. Is the Arab identity a way that takes us beyond Shi'i, Sunni, Christian, Muslim, etc.? Is the Arab identity? It's still needed. It's still needed because the local states, whether it's Iraqi state or the Syrian state or any other state, has created so many divisions and tried to disconnect their connection with the Arab identity or with the Islamic identity. You cannot. That region has to build its identity probably now from scratch.
Right. So, okay. We grew up, my generation, and I'm talking about myself as a Palestinian, as an Arab, and I traveled the Arab world and lived in many Arab countries and so on. My generation was Pan-Arabist, and Pan-Arabism meant, two things. It meant that Palestine is the central cause. Everybody is committed to the liberation of Palestine. And the other cause, somehow, a sort of vague, if not vague, not well-defined, let's put it, one not well-defined perception of socialism and, a republic that, is sort of passionate about its own sovereignty and its own dignity. But now, is the Palestinian, could the Palestinian cause be central again to the Arabs? Is there kind of a conflict between, let's say, the centrality of the Palestinian cause on the one hand, and the pursuit of freedoms and liberalism and so on, as many claim? Is there are they, can they be reconciled with one another, or are they sort of one can only exist at the expense of the other?
No, the Palestinian cause is still the central cause, but it's not anymore in the way it expressed itself in the past, where regimes said this is our central cause. Regimes are in trouble, have sanctions on them, are facing so many international laws that they don't know how to deal with. They are cornered, they are marginalized. The populations are the ones that have a different imagination, a different feel, and to them, Palestine is a central cause but injustice in their countries is also a central cause. And
Right.
building a state that is accountable, and a state that is independent, and a state that cares about its people, and leaders that change routinely through elections and etc., is a central issue today in the Arab world. And this all is coming around a sense of an identity issue, Arab or Islam, or a sense of injustice, the sense of injustice, the reality of justice in Palestine. These things are very interconnected, and they will produce some sort of a project. Today, what the Arab world is lacking, there is no Arab project.
Right.
There's an Iranian project, there's a Turkish project, there's an Israeli project. And we know what the Israeli project is in the Palestinian lands, but also the Israeli project is also aiming at the Arab world.
Right.
It
Yeah,
aims at fragmentation, it aims at its weakness, it builds contacts with parties that it can have a better impact on them, that they cannot say much of a no, given their weakness in front of Iran and Turkey and other countries. So the question of how can the Arab world rebuild again, but does it rebuild with the same way it did in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s to be destroyed later?
Right.
There are serious questions today being asked.
So I want to ask you, if Palestine or the Palestinian cause can still, engender passions in the Arab world, what we have seen in the last couple of weeks, and even since the beginning of Ramadan, when the whole thing began at Sheikh Jarrah and Al-Aqsa, we have seen, some, maybe groups of people going out on the streets and, expressing solidarity, but we have not seen it all across the board. We've seen it, in the last few days. We've seen it in Morocco, for instance, where in fact, the country has normalized with Israel just, a couple of months ago and so on. And we've seen it maybe in Kuwait to a certain extent. We've seen it in Jordan, but really nowhere else, so to speak. And I must admit in Iraq as well. So why, despite, what we've seen, despite the images that we see every day, it has not ignited the kind of, passionate response or expression of solidarity? Why is that?
Again, we go back to repression.
Yeah.
Today, who's in jail in the Arab world?
Yeah.
You look at Egypt and look at elsewhere. Who's in jail?
Yeah.
Some of the best elites, some of the best writers, some of the most independent minds. Who's in exile? Some of the best, most of the best writers and thinkers and independent minds. And who can stay? Those who are not able to say anything, though they may think otherwise, because they will be pulled to jail. And jail conditions are not easy at all in the Arab world. That came with the price after the Arab revolutions imposed on the populations of the region. However, this will not be sustained. This cannot stay. It will not stay. I think many of the regimes, I don't say, many, and are losing in influence, losing in credibility, losing in convincing. All these people in jail and a lot of torture. There are also people who disappear. We're going through the old Argentinian phase of the 1970s, etc., Chile, Argentina, etc. It's a phase, but that phase cannot be sustained because the Arab populations are becoming poorer, are becoming in more.
Despite all the wealth,
nothing is improving. The regimes are not delivering.
Right.
So it's losing credibility, popularity, etc. With time, you look today and you compare with 5 years ago, things are changing. 5 years later, much more. So they are in solidarity with the Palestinians, but at the same time, they are also in a jail, in a bigger one. And in the past, the Arab regimes used to allow that solidarity to come out, to come up, to express itself because it released pressure. Today, the Arab regimes realize that even that model is problematic. And it comes back to it, and it's afraid. I mean, I think many of the Arab regimes are shocked that this has happened, that few young people in Jerusalem and in Sheikh Jarrah, these activists were created an entire picture, an entire phenomena, brought back the Palestinian story to every household in the Arab world, but to many households worldwide. It's in that context that we need to see it.
I want to switch gears. I mean, we could talk about this forever, and I have so many questions from our viewers and so on. But I wanted to ask you about this very last point. I mean, the Palestinians or the Jerusalemites were able to create something that really brought the Palestinians together. I mean, for a very long time, Gaza was fighting its wars alone, so to speak. I don't want to use that, but Israel would come and bomb Gaza. The West Bank would not move. Jerusalem would not move, and so on. But this time is different. Is that correct?
Yes. Today, you see, you always look in big social movements at the moment.
Yeah, there is an element of unity.
Unites it all, and so the Bouazizes of the Palestinian new expression. Rebellion, Intifada, etc., came from Sheikh Jarrah and the Aqsa Mosque, and it ignited. But the room was full of gas. It needed someone to ignite it. Those youngsters felt it, realized it, did a campaign, and it happened. But the room is full of gas. Palestinians in 1948 Palestine are not happy regarding their condition, and they've been discriminated against, and the discrimination is increasing. Same with the West Bank, given all the pressure. I mean, maybe Ramallah has some affluence. You go to the areas outside Ramallah, a lot of unemployment, a lot of poverty, difficulties, and it is the occupation, because the occupation has cut down the West Bank's economy, isolated its areas. People cannot trade at ease. You cannot trade with Jerusalem. They cannot move from one place to the other. And at the same time, the settlements are eating up, are destroying the rest of the West Bank, and they are putting settlers there that use Palestinian water and Palestinian resources. Right. And they destroyed the Palestinian state's ideal. Right. Zionist movement and the Israeli government under Netanyahu. Now you go to Gaza, encircled, under siege, from sea, from air, from ground. One of the biggest and strongest armies in the world is now putting all its abilities against a small organization, relatively speaking, a small area, 350 square kilometers, populated with more than 2.5 million people, 2.3 million people. How can that happen? So the room was full of gas. And the Palestinians realized that nobody will help them until they help themselves. And nobody will sympathize with them until they present their story again. And that they need to keep presenting their story every day and every month, as much as they can at every level, and not to be contained by any political authority or otherwise. And I think those young activists discovered the moment, discovered what is happening, and ignited it. And that is the scene today. And the question after that scene will be how to sustain. How to sustain, not necessarily on the military level, through civil unrest, so civil disobedience, by expressing the story and the need to express all the realities of injustice, by holding to your land, by holding to your home, by challenging the settlers, etc. Yes, there will be casualties, but that is a very important movement to sustain, given today that I feel for the first time in a long time, and maybe for the first time ever, that the world is listening. And I see some people who have taken positions I didn't expect them. Singers, basketball players across the world and across the USA. So there is, even in the Democratic Party, even among many Jewish youngsters and others who are active, there is a change of heart that, fine, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, but what does this have to do with murdering children, with putting cities under siege, destroying people, destroying houses? 50,000, 60,000 houses were destroyed in the West Bank over a period of a couple of decades. The land has been taken, and there is more land to be taken. Every day there is a new settlement project by groups that are very extremist and very ISIS-like, ISIS-like in their ideology.
Yeah. That's right.
And today, at least, there is a realization the world, at least the peoples of the world, the structures, the peoples of the world are paying attention. That should continue.
Yeah. So you mentioned something about the Democratic Party here in the United States, and I want to ask you, as a political scientist and a long time observer of the United States and what it does and its hegemony all over the world and its role in the world, so to speak, what should the Palestinians expect from the Biden administration? I mean, we've seen this administration push off the urgency of the fighting that is going on. I mean, they come up with statements, that Israel has a right to defend itself, which is really a euphemism for Israel to keep going, to keep killing Palestinians, to keep destroying and so on, using American weapons and so on. So what should the Palestinians today, maybe those who are involved in fighting like Hamas in Gaza or the Palestinian Authority, I mean, in terms of, let's say, the immediate future, what should they or could they expect from the Biden administration?
Well, at least I will say they will not expect from the Biden administration what Trump was doing.
Right.
Trump was a very extreme. I mean, he had a settler mentality, and his
son-in-law is a settler. I mean, they aided the Beit El, So anyway.
So Trump was an extreme case. Biden is definitely limited to many conditions. So I expect certain things to happen. Maybe some pressure for a ceasefire, maybe, but I don't expect a major breakthrough. I don't expect major proposals or ideas. President Biden did put the Palestinian issue on the slow burner and was focused on China and other regions in the world. They didn't want to get involved in the Palestinian story. But the Palestinian story involved the entire world with it. And so there should be some steps. However, I'm not expecting much, but at least I'm expecting that people are changing, and that change should continue, and that change could have an impact on politicians. There are members of Congress today who talk about what is happening in Palestine. Could they increase in numbers? There are members of different civil society in America who are in full solidarity with the Palestinians. I think what has started now, what has happened now, should continue, and that will produce certain results at some point. And one should ally with all of those who are committed. And I see it even when they go to sit-ins and demonstrations in the US. I see Black Lives Matter are central among other groups. So there is a change.
Okay, let me go to some of the questions that we received. So we have one that says it is clear that Israel has zero desire to respect the right of return. By the way, like Peter Beinart, who is a great American intellectual and so on, just wrote an essay a couple of days ago, said that the only way to prevent war is really for the Palestinians to exercise the right of return. So, what do you think it will take for Israel to finally, acquiesce to the Palestinian right to return?
I read that piece. That was an excellent piece.
Right. Yeah.
And it gives hope.
Yeah.
Because if the right of return is not dealt with properly and justly, the Nakba is going to keep surfacing all over again. Yeah. And as he says in the article, what makes a group of Jews who didn't have any relation with Palestine for 2,000 years to come up again with some interpretation, mostly a Christian evangelical interpretation, to go to Palestine? What will make Palestinians who are living the Nakba every day, every moment, who were kicked out of their houses and homes just 73 years ago, and the evacuation from their land continued as Israel pursued creating out of them refugees. 67, there were like 300,000 of them. And then they keep pressuring them to leave, putting all the difficulties. So the Nakba is a present reality. It's not history. It's not like Something has happened 50 years or 80 years or 100 or 1,000 years, and it's just a history. It is a present reality, and therefore the right of return that is a product of the Nakba will not go away. Whether Palestinian leaders say, I'm forgetting about it, or not. It has nothing to do. It is a reality of feelings and rights, and it is guaranteed by international law at every level. It has to be addressed. It cannot be left. What would make Israel agree to that? That's where. See, today Israel has created in Palestine an apartheid situation.
Mm-hmm.
And this apartheid situation is what we describe today. Blockades, you don't have an airport, you can't leave, you can't come, everything is controlled. Israel has created an apartheid discrimination. Roads for Israelis, roads for Palestinians.
Right.
An apartheid where Palestinians cannot go pray in Aqsa, meaning those in the West Bank.
Right.
Apartheid, you go to Hebron, the same street is divided. The bigger one for Israeli settlers, the smaller one for the population of Hebron, who lives there in their houses. Settlements, it's an apartheid. And therefore, the struggle against apartheid is what will produce that change. It's the awareness among Jews in the world, but also public opinion in the world, but also all people who understand justice and support justice and stand for justice. The pressure, sanctions on Israel. That's where the boycott comes. And so it's a process now. Now the situation in Palestine has been elevated to a certain level, but that's the continuity of the struggle against apartheid. It's the only way to protect yourself, to defend your land, to exist, to get your rights, to face up to racism, to destroy walls, to live in dignity. And that's happened in South Africa.
Yeah.
And I see there is the same form in different ways is happening in Palestine, but it's a long struggle. It's not going to end in 1 year or 2 years or 5 years. And at the climax of that struggle, you will have changes in the Israeli mindset. You will have changes in the Jewish mindset as well, as they realize more and more that there is no way out of this. There is no way you can get rid of the Palestinian people. And there is no way you can sustain that apartheid. And once that realization is there, then everything is possible. So the problem is with Zionism at its core, and its core beliefs and the way it handles the whole story around it, the land, the people of Palestine, the whole issue of the right of return for Jews, but not for Palestinians. Right. Israel settled more than 1 million Russian Jews just between the 90s.
Right.
Yeah. Why not settle Palestinians?
Right.
You're gonna fight? People fight only when there is injustice. Look at America. It has Palestinians, it has millions of Arabs, it has millions of Latinos, it has millions. Why white supremacists will not work? Because it is trying to destroy a model that works for the world. Regardless what we think of how deep is American democracy or not, we look at the experiment, we see that there are all kinds of people, they're living in peace. They will definitely go to war. If there is injustice and you're persecuting a particular group of people, etc., and you're not allowing them to express themselves, so why the fear of people who belong to the land, who belong to the place? So yes, even Alain Pépé have argued for the right of return, who is an Israeli scholar of a first-class scholar. So I would argue in that context, but it's going to take a long struggle to get there. It's not like tomorrow or after tomorrow.
Right, indeed. I mean, the Israelis will never reconcile themselves to right to return. The current Israeli leadership and so on, or the ruling class, and that's why they don't even recognize the existence of the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Jerusalem and so on, and they go over to places that are far away. Hence the normalization. And I have a question for you from our chairman, Dr. Subhi, to comment on the normalization. I'm sure it is transactional in many ways, not really genuine in any way, but I'd like you to see how this normalization, in terms of what is happening now in Gaza and Jerusalem, What is the future of this normalization?
I mean, it's a surprise for the normalization process, because the normalization came based on a paradigm that, and it looks that, I mean, several states have been pulled into that direction, that yes, there can be peace with the Arabs without addressing the grievances and the injustices that the Palestinians are suffering from, or even without Israeli withdrawal from any land, by continuing to control all of Palestine. So that normalization started on the wrong foot. And today, the uprising we see in Palestine is telling us there is no peace actual between the Arab world and Israel without dealing with the Palestinian cause and the injustices the Palestinians are suffering from. But also with Gaza entering the war, it is saying there is no solution to the Palestine question, even whatever you do, without also involving Gaza. Because there is all these attempts by the Israelis to divide the Palestinians, Palestinian Authority,
isolate
ABC, East Jerusalem alone, Aqsa and Sheikh Jarrah, Palestinians of 1948 who live behind what is called the Green Line, another situation, and Gaza, another situation. Suddenly, all these situations came together to express one phenomena and one expression of facing up to their rights.
I have a question on how do you see, or do you believe that the current uprising in Palestine will continue to gain momentum? Or once there is, I guess, a quiet or a ceasefire or something like this, it will be, so it will recede. How do you see it?
See, as long as the Israelis continue with apartheid,
right,
the Palestinians will continue to resist it.
Right.
However, much of this resistance in the last months and in the last years was not seen by the world. Today, it is seen by the world because of a larger phenomenon. And I think that after a ceasefire, Palestinians will continue, but it may take different forms, different shapes, different methods of expression, but they're gonna come and take and grab the houses in Sheikh Jarrah. You're gonna see confrontation. You're gonna go into Aqsa because the settler group believes that they have to destroy Al-Aqsa or share it with the Palestinians. It will ignite. See, the Israelis, in the way they behave, in the way they operate, in the way Zionism's ideological beliefs are translated on the ground to grabbing land, to building settlements, to taking houses, all of this, the situation will continue to ignite. Now, maybe Palestinians will take a break. Maybe there will be a time where things kind of calm down, but then it will ignite again. Today, it has entered a different level. It's a different level that is more challenging to the apartheid system at the hands of a younger generation.
So let me take you back to the current situation, the current uprising. I mean, we don't want to call it intifada. It was basically a movement to protect Al-Aqsa, to protect the integrity of Arab East Jerusalem, Sheikh Jarrah, and all these things. But I want to take you back to the issue, a nagging issue of the leadership, because on the one hand, I mean, let's face it, we have a leadership of the Palestinian Authority that is not only, been there for a very long time, it's aging, it's an understatement, it's aging, in many ways, but it's also disconnected from what we see, this youth. I'm just pondering with you here, I'm exploring with you. Is it possible that we see, as we have seen in the 50s, the rise of the Palestinian factions and so on with their ideologies? Can we see the same thing that is really independent from, let's say, the political environment around it? Can we see a rise in youth, sort of more organized effort that can probably not only be in Jerusalem and in the West Bank and so on, but also in Gaza, where there is, a very strong political grip by Hamas?
I would see that, yes. I would see changes happening. It's hard to predict timing. Yes, there is a lot of marginalization to the existing leadership. That marginalization started by the Israelis. They weakened the Palestinian Authority themselves by grabbing more land and putting more settlements and putting economic pressures on it and all the security dealings that has been taking place. So in a way, there is a vacuum in that context, and that vacuum will be filled at some point. If you recall, just recently there was the whole discussion about the elections and Barghouti in jail. Marwan was potential. So you may have ended up with a president of Palestine who is in jail. I think we'll also see surprises. We will see things are changed. Change has happened, but how will it express itself is a matter to be seen, given that the Palestinians are also in a dilemma in the West Bank. On the one hand, they don't want to get into a big conflict with the Palestinian Authority where the Israelis will exploit. And on the other hand, they are focused on the Israelis. So as the confrontations continue with the Israelis, these changes will continue at the grassroots. The people are out in the streets. The people are expressing themselves. There is a movement going on. There is more, there is space taking place. So I find it natural that it will have an impact on the leadership, and as well will produce new leaders at different levels. We're already seeing the young ones coming to life.
Yeah, why? I mean, why this perceived? It may not be the case, but there is a perceived disengagement by the leadership from this whole thing that goes around. I mean, in Gaza, we see a tremendous fight between Hamas and other resistance movement in the perceived Gaza Strip and the Israeli occupation. We see people on the street facing up to the Israeli occupation and so on. We see that some of the security elements in the Palestinian Authority itself being targeted, but there is a perceived disengagement. There's a disconnect between the leadership in Ramallah and the street, so to speak. Why is that? Is that real? Is that just exaggerated?
You remember we spoke that we are all products of our generation,
right? Yeah.
And that generation that created the Palestinian Authority, I mean, ended up creating what is closer to an Arab regime, but it also had a colonial reality surrounding it, Israel, its pressure, its economic pressures, its system, its ability to take more lands, to build more settlements, to isolate it. None of the leaders can even move from area to area without security check-up, without a security check-up with the Israelis. The Israelis have to allow the movement, even in the West Bank. So that generation is a product of that era. But there is a new era coming. It will produce a different style and a different level of leadership. How it will express itself, how it will happen. Will the leadership come and say, we have done what we can, we move on? Will they go back to some form of elections? Or will they submit to the will of the power of the people in the region, in different regions in Palestine, in different areas in Palestine, is to be seen.
So let me ask you something that just occurred to me. I mean, all this mass movement that we have seen, that includes Palestinians in Jerusalem, the West Bank, 1948, Gaza, and all these things, it almost, has relegated the Trump plan, the so-called deal of the century, if you remember, it seemed like ages ago. But on the ground, it is being implemented. Would you, in your opinion, what is the fate of this plan now as a result of this, of this passionate and strong popular movement in occupied Palestine?
I think Trump did what he wanted to do. He wanted normalization with several Arab countries, but he failed to push it more to others. There were others under a lot of pressure. It's well known. I mean, several Arab Gulf countries were under more severe pressure to normalize, but they were able to maneuver themselves out of it. So it ended up with some states, not all the states. And the Israelis, the embassy has been already moved to Jerusalem. So some of it has happened. But at the same time, so-called deal of the century today proves in the eyes of the world that it doesn't solve anything. And on the contrary, some of the states that they normalized with could end up denormalizing in a different stage, in a different era. So it didn't solve anything. It only complicated things and made the US look negatively, look bad in the eyes of millions, hundreds of millions of Arabs, and definitely in the eyes of the Palestinians.
So do you believe that, one of the things that this administration, the Biden administration, can do is basically disavow the deal of the century to move forward, to gain some credibility?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I see we are in a process. There is a rebellion. There is a situation. They may have to move away of some of it. They're not going, in my opinion, to move away from the embassy in Jerusalem or the normalization with the UAE, Bahrain, etc. They will continue that. And to what extent do they want to be involved? And to what extent is there pressure on them to be involved? And to what extent is there a counter pressure by the Israelis as well? There is also issues in the US regarding policy towards Palestine and the Arab world. That's an issue has been always there, right? I mean, it's not new, but so even with good intentions, I realize there is some good intentions in the administration. There are so many impediments in Congress and elsewhere, while you have an administration focused still on Corona, focused on the economy, focused on China, focused, etc. So I'm not sure how far will they go.
Well, I mean, let's look at this administration, what it has done so far with the Palestinian-Israeli issue. I mean, I think you mentioned that Biden came into office saying that this is not a priority for me. The Palestinian-Israeli is not a priority. I want to focus on, like you mentioned, China, maybe the Iran deal, maybe, bringing the troops from Afghanistan and so on. But somehow the Palestinian issue always finds a way to reimpose itself on the stage of the world. But, we have not seen this administration really take measures to say that is wrong. That is not something that we will in any way, continue to espouse or defend or anything. That, they pay lip service to the two-state solution, but nothing really has materialized. I mean, we look at the UN, Dr. Shafeeq. What happened in the last week? The United States, obstructed 4 efforts to have something done at the Security Council. They just scuttled it. Every time there's an effort by the other 14 members, the U.S. says, no, this is going to complicate our diplomatic effort that is ongoing. And they claim to have a diplomatic effort. Today, the White House issued a statement. I saw the spokesperson from the White House say that, Biden, the president, spoke with the Israeli prime minister and told him you should de-escalate in preparation for a ceasefire. But I'm not really too sure. How do you see this week, ending? Are we going to have some sort of a ceasefire? Is this administration going to, at one time, to say, Netanyahu, enough, stop? I mean, after all, when Biden was vice president in 2014, we saw that Israel's war on Gaza continued for 51 days, 2,200 people, a lot of them women and children, half of them women and children were killed. So what do you expect to see in the next few days as far as the U.S. role and the conflict?
I mean, I think there is more pressure, and the pressure is mounting on Israel as it continues. And maybe the American administration will push for a ceasefire. Now, because that's a burning issue. And it's in the face, it's daily. But how far will it push beyond that is not clear. It will try to deal with the escalation, to de-escalate, but maybe stop there. Stop there. And this is where I see that America will change one day, but that has to take place at the grassroots level. That has to reflect itself over time in Congress and elsewhere. And as the I mean, look at someone like Bernie Sanders and what he stands for. But there is a grassroots movement behind that thinking. So we need to be objective by saying that the change is not going to happen soon or fast. But I do know that this administration isn't happy with the continuity of a warlike situation and the Gaza attacks, and many children are dying, many families, huge buildings are put to the ground. It's in the face, and definitely the pressures come from different places, from different corners of the world, as much as from different corners of the US population.
I'm not very optimistic as far as the administration is concerned. I mean, I've seen them one after another. I observed this administration and past administration keeping parroting out the same slogan, two-state solution, but Israel has a right to defend itself, which is, like a blank check to go ahead and do what it wants. We have not seen any, diplomatic effort on the ground and so on. So I don't know. I don't have much faith in at least, in the immediate future for this administration taking fundamental steps to really end the suffering of the Palestinians. But let me ask you, as someone who also knows the world, the same thing is also true in Europe. Why is that? Why is there no, at the personal level, now at the governmental level, there is not much or a great deal of sympathy with the Palestinians or solidarity or strong stance against Israel, although we see it, by the peoples of this country. Why is that? Why is the Palestinian issue that is so stark, as we see it today, is failing to generate the kind of empathy by the government, the European government, that can reflect their people's sentiment?
See, this is why my focus in the previous question was a ceasefire is possible, and I see the American administration trying to get us in that direction, but not beyond that, not more. So maybe that's the only thing that will happen. However, I'm not sure how long would that take as well, whether it's another 2-3 days or another 10 days. However, for a change in governments in the world, the movement in Palestine that has taken shape in the last few weeks has to continue.
Yeah.
The struggle against this kind of apartheid has to continue. And it's slow, building step by step, putting more pressure and more pressure, boycott, etc. And over time, I mean, look at South Africa. It took decades. It took decades under Mandela's leadership. And the regime finally came to its senses once it realized it cannot get away with murder, it cannot get away with the apartheid, it cannot get away with discrimination, with racism. There was so much sanctions. And America was the last, because it was very on good terms with South Africa. Israel was indefinitely good terms with South Africa. Oh, so it was the last, the US, to have a congressional act just a few years before apartheid ended. So we need to look at that. You see, the solution is not in diplomacy. The solution is not it's in the struggle. It's in the grassroots struggle. It's in the civil disobedience. It's in the non-military side of it, though Gaza has a military side and they have the right to do that, but that's not going to be the thing you're going to see all the time. There are these situations that happen between Gaza and the surrounding, but it's not all the time. Even in Gaza, there was an attempt to go to the border and fly balloons and do popular movement. So popular grassroots movement that also opens up to the world and to the social media, that brings the story to every house, that continues, that makes people see exactly, because Israel has always worked hard on hiding its crimes, worked hard on doing the worst, but without anybody seeing, doing everything at night, doing everything when the world is asleep. Now is the time where accountability is there, where everything has to be exposed and magnified and clearly put in the face of the world. I think that is the side that will create the kind of movement that can bring this apartheid into a state of collapse and bring many Israelis to realize as well what is happening, independent, regardless how far do they know or not, and many Israeli intellectuals to feel the pressure as well that they have to take a stand, or else this boycott, this situation will continue. It will just build up day after day. I think we entered an era like this, and it's very important to keep that as long as the apartheid continues, and there is nothing in the environment that's telling us that this apartheid is going to leave tomorrow, that the Israeli army is withdrawing, that the settlements are leaving, that Aqsa is left alone, that Sheikh Jarrah is left alone. No, they're going to continue on Sheikh Jarrah. They're going to continue, but let the world know and let everybody be aware of what is happening. I think that will create a different feel for the entire nations of the globe.
On this profound note, Dr. Shafeeq, we end our conversation today. It is really very, very profound what you just said, that the struggle must continue. It's not diplomacy, but what happens on the ground, and that is 100% true. The Palestinian struggle in Jerusalem and Sheikh Jarrah was basically reflected and expressed in solidarity with the Palestinians, and that's what matters. Thank you very much. This has been truly enlightening. We can go on and discuss many things. There are so many aspects to this discussion. So we thank you. I thank you, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you, sir.
I look forward. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
I turn you over to.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ghabra. We appreciate you coming here to speak. And that was an excellent presentation. And thank you so much. It's more relevant than ever today. So thank you for taking the time, and we hope to have you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for your effort.
Thank you.
Take care. Goodbye to you. Bye-bye. And to your audience.
Thank you so much.